Play ball! 1939, 1940, and 1941 play ball baseball cards. Happy hobby, I'm David Gunnison. Today we're talking about vintage baseball cards, not just vintage baseball cards. We're talking about pre-war baseball cards. Now these are cards pre-war, are usually considered like 1939 and earlier. So today we're talking about a 1939 card. This is the very first pre-war baseball card I've ever gotten. This is the oldest card now in my collection, and I bought this from Ballpark Memories. Remember Garrett? I interviewed him, maybe I want to say maybe a couple years ago now. But Ballpark Memories is a great YouTube channel. Really good guy. He's a guy. He's grown up in the industry. His father owned a sports card store or a local card shop, and they do shows all the time. And Garrett is a young man that knows a lot about baseball cards and vintage cards and pre-war cards. So he sells these on his Twitter account, X account, Ballpark Memories, and he's selling them all the time. And he had some up for sale not too long ago. One of them was a card that I bought, and it got to me, and now I'm going to share it with you. We're going to talk about it and get a little bit into it. But it's a 1939 play ball baseball cards. Now, 1939 play ball was a set produced by a Philadelphia gum-based company. Basically, it's the guy that ended up owning Bowman. His name was Jacob Bowman, Jacob Warren Bowman. He owned the Philadelphia Gum Company. Now, they owned a brand of gum called Bologna Gum, Blony Gum. Even back then, nobody could do the math on bologna. Like, that doesn't sound good at all. Who wants bologna flavored bubblegum? But this piece of bubblegum, its catch tag was 3 bites for a penny. It was a huge piece. It was the biggest piece of gum you could buy for 1 penny. Do I want 3 bites of gum? Am I sharing it? 1 piece of gum with 2 other people? Maybe back then. It was a different world. It was the Depression, and interestingly enough, gum was a repression-proof product. People were buying gum left and right. It was a rising industry back then. There was actually a few different companies and a few different sports card companies that rose out of this Philadelphia gum world, including this other company called Philadelphia Gum, which ended up in the late 60s or mid 60s starting to produce Philadelphia football cards that ended up, they had, I think, 4-year run. But anyways, we're talking about play ball baseball cards, which is a product that came from Bowman, Jacob Bowman. And these play ball cards, they were a big deal because it was really the first cards that were an actual image of the player. If you look back in the, Gaudy, T206, look at all those older sets of pre-war cards. A lot of them were kind of either drawings or sketches or cartoons, all these different things. But this play ball set, well, when you look at it, and here's the card that I got. This is a Hank Greenberg 1939 play ball Hank Greenberg card. Now, Hank Greenberg, I'll talk about another video. He was a very important player in baseball, and a very important athlete in American sports at that time specifically, because he was one of the very first Jewish superstars. We'll get into that in another video, because I'm going to get this guy graded, and when it comes back, I'll do a video on it. But 1939, tough time to be a Jewish American, tough time to be Jewish anyone in the world. So Hank Greenberg was a superstar, big slugger. This card I just love. When I talked with Garrett and he was showing me the different cards available, this one jumped out at me because I really wanted. Hank Greenberg's granddaughter actually met Melissa Greenberg, went to a baseball game with her. One of the first year that Citi Field opened up. EMAC was with us, as a matter of fact. And we had a great time. She was awesome. We liked her a lot. But anyway, so this card just jumped out at me. So this card, as you can see, it's an image, black and white image of Hank Greenberg. There weren't cards that looked like this back then. And as the years progressed, they started to get a little more Um, they looked a little. They started looking a little different. At different times, they would go back to the sketches, like you think of like 1956 tops, or even from 52 to 56. Then 57, I believe, was the first color images of baseball players on cards. So that's the importance of this set. 1939, 1940, and 1941 play ball baseball cards. These took over the reins basically from Gowdy. Gowdy was kind of the sports cards king in the early 30s, and then these cards really came in and carried the baton, so to speak, for a few years. Then what happened in the 40s? There was a paper ration because of the wars, so fewer cards were used. Some companies started using like recycled rag paper, which I can't think that held up really great. So you can understand that this is a very important set, and I'm super excited to have this in my possession. So as you can see on this card, there is some flaws. There's some big flaws. I mean, he's got a big piece of paper loss right over his face. Unless that's a Drew Brees mole. It's possible. I don't think it is. But that's some paper loss right there. You can see some down on his shoulder. There's some paper loss. The corners are obviously a little soft, a little. I don't see any real big creases or anything like that. So when I was buying this from Garrett, I told him because this is going to be the first pre-war card up in my collection. I'm excited about it. I'm gonna send this to SGC because they do vintage really well. And I was asking, so what's your opinion? Like, what do you think the grade is going to come back on this? He says he thinks it's going to be above a 1, possibly above a 2 for this card. I don't know with the paper loss if it's going to get a 2, but I did pull it out and look at it. Man, outside of the paper loss, and it's the centering's a little obviously a little off. It's a really nice looking card. This card stock is a little different. It's a little thicker. It's a little bigger than what we're used to, what we think of with, let's say, 56. Those 50s tops cards. But it's nice, and it's pretty cool to hold something that's 80 something years old, 80 years old. Did I do my math right? Yeah, 80 years old. Pretty cool. It's pretty neat, especially when it's somebody like as big as Hank Greenberg was. Um, it's a pretty cool thing. I'm looking forward to seeing this now in the back. When you look at the back of the card, it kind of gives a nice little story about Hank Greenberg. He was thought to be the one that if someone was going to break Babe Ruth's record home runs in a single season, it was going to be Hank Greenberg. Big bat, this guy. And unfortunately, he lost. He was in the war. He lost a few years because of the war. The Bowman uh, guy I mentioned earlier, so he owned play ball cards and then stopped producing in 1941, but then picked back up in the 19 was it 49 48 set. He started Bowman again. He created a whole new company called Bowman and started producing these 1948 Bowman cards at that point. So it's pretty cool connection to old pre-war and then also the beginning of modern cards, that 1948 with Leaf baseball cards going forward, and Bowman was right there with it. So it's pretty interesting. So I'm starting to get into the pre-war cards. I was saying earlier how I'm going to have that in one of my displays. I eventually want to get a 1933 Gowdy card. My goal is to get Hall of Famers. They don't have to be the rookie cards, but I would like to get Hall of Famers from these different sets that I'm talking about. I'd like to get a T206 card at some point. And in another video, I'll go through a little bit more about what's the difference between T206 and T205 or N206. Like there's all these different variations. They all come from, if you're interested in learning about, from the American Card Company catalog. It's one guy that sat down and cataloged all of this stuff. I think it was in 1967. He cataloged all of this stuff, and it's pretty amazing. So that's where T206 came. His numbering system, his cataloging system, that's where it came from. And now I have my pre-war card. I look forward to getting some other pre-war cards. There's some other cards. Old Judge is another brand I'd like to. So you'll see. Hopefully, in the next couple of years, I'll be getting my hands on some of those and be able to share some with you. Most likely, the Hall of Famers that I get will be guys you've never heard of, that you don't know of. Like I am eyeballing one. I believe it's an Old Judge card of Steamer Flanagan, but it, I don't think you've ever heard of Steamer Flanagan. But it's a cool name, so I'm like, that might be kind of cool to get. It's cheap. It's cheapish. among those cards. So, at any rate, I hope you enjoyed this. Hope you learned something. Let me know what you think. Do you have some pre-war cards? Do you ever thought of getting any pre-war cards? It's pretty exciting. It's pretty cool to get, and it helps me have a happy hobby.